Hi. Today I wanted to make a very quick, casual video about what I think is the most important thing you need to know about posing. I've made a video about this before, but this is such an important principle to know that I wanted to make a specific dedicated video explaining more in depth about this specific thing. Something a little bit different that we're trying today is that we're gonna do it traditionally in a sketchbook, because when I've done tutorials before, they've been on the tablet, on Clip Studio or Photoshop, and people are always like, but can I do this in my sketchbook? And I'm like, yeah, it's a drawing principle. You could apply this when you're drawing in mud with a stick if you wanted to. Drawing principles are kind of universal. Once you understand it, you can apply it anywhere, traditionally, digitally. So what we're gonna be talking about today is going to be especially helpful if you are more of a beginner at drawing bodies and poses, especially from imagination. If you are more advanced, this is probably something you've already picked up either intuitively or you just practiced it consciously. So let's just divide the body up into different components, right? There's the head, there's the torso, there's the pelvis, and then you got all your limbs. Arms, legs. So we have all the body components. Head, torso, pelvis, and then all the limbs. On top of this, I usually like to add the collarbone, shoulder gesture line. I don't know what it's gonna be called, but that. And then we can add the spine in if we want. Collarbone and spine. But the main ones that we want to focus on, especially that I want to drill into your head, is the head, the torso, and the pelvis, okay? These are the main components of the body and the main parts of any pose also. So each part of the body can rotate, okay? It's not just 2D. Each part has a certain rotation to it. And this is the most key principle that I want to teach you today, is how to control the different rotations of these body components. So each of these components have 3 axes of rotation. So let's just take the head, for example. Head. The head can move to the right and to the left, right? That's one rotation. So if we wanted to draw that, it would be like this. To the right or to the left. It can also rotate up or down like this. Up or down. And then it can also rotate like this. I don't really know how to distinguish this right to left to this right to left, but they're different, okay? The tilt. And I drew that kind of wrong, but I'm gonna try to fix it with the guidelines. So the head, the torso, and the pelvis can all rotate in all of these 3 axes. 3 axes of rotation. Up and down, left to right, side to side, okay? And the absolute key when drawing characters is that your character will look stiff and awkward if your head, your torso, and your pelvis are in the exact same rotation among all 3 axes. So for example, if you have a character that is kind of just like this, just standing straight up, and all of their 3 components are kind of facing the same, this is kind of stiff. I actually made it a little bit more interesting than I should have, but I think you should be able to get the point. It's kind of like if you were posing for a photo and don't know how to pose and someone's just like, let's take a photo. So then you just stand straight still like this and you look really awkward in the camera. That's the impression I get when like someone draws a character that is like the same in all three rotations. Just start experimenting with different combinations of different rotations of the head, torso, and pelvis. So for example, you could be like, okay, I'm going to keep the head straight front of head normal. But what if the torso was tilted upwards a little bit and to the viewer left? And then the pelvis is usually tilted backwards like this. But what if it's like facing more towards us rather than to the side, like the torso is? Well, this will make a much more interesting pose, especially if you know how to like draw forms on top of this. And then let's do another experiment. I'm like, what if we tilt the head downwards and to the right? And then what if we have the torso facing down a little bit also, but still kind of facing this direction, the same direction as the head? And then what if we have the pelvis kind of like over here, but it's tilted even more to the right than both of these? I'm just making these up. I don't really know how these are going to turn out. But if we connect these, in my opinion, this is a little bit stiff still because they're all kind of facing to the right. So if I wanted to make this pose a little bit more interesting, I would change the head. I think the head is messing this up. I would either change the head to be looking the other way or just tilt it a different way. Maybe tilt it upwards since both of these are tilted downwards. Let's try this pose again with the head tilted a different way. Yeah, I think this is more interesting. One thing that is kind of important to note about this is that like I've noticed that when I like assign this sort of exploration to people that I'm mentoring, they will understand the principle of like drawing the head, torso, and pelvis in different rotations. But when it comes to drawing the like actual body and clothes on top of that form, they just start ignoring the guidelines that they draw. So for example, they might do something like this. It usually happens in the pelvis area because people are not usually like sure how to deal with that area if they haven't studied it before. So for example, if you're gonna draw like something like this, let's just take this one for example. I drew the torso like this and the pelvis facing more towards us. It is very common for people when they just start drawing like the body on top of this to ignore the guidelines and to just draw what they know, which is like maybe they're just gonna draw like a body facing forward. Like this is completely ignoring the guidelines. So this sort of practice is gonna be hard to implement if you're not used to drawing forms on top of forms. So that is something that you should practice also. It might help a slightly more advanced like version of this is if you use boxes instead of circles, because a lot of times when people use circles, they don't like draw through the form. So an example of this would be like, in some of these I'm not drawing through the forms, but And that's my mistake. But here's just an example of not drawing through form. For example, if you were drawing this head, let's just say this is a head. You want to be able to picture like the back of the head form as well. Sometimes when people start drawing guidelines, it becomes really arbitrary. Like they're like, okay, all I have to do is draw a cross mark, right? I just have to do like this. This doesn't show form. This doesn't show any sort of form whatsoever. It's kind of telling you that this is just like a flat circle with a flat cross on it. You need to like follow the form and be able to kind of see through to the back of it as well. If the idea of drawing forms on top of forms is kind of like foreign to you, I would practice like doing this sort of thing, like just drawing through the forms, drawing like the dotted lines through the back of a form. You can do this with ovals and spheres. You can do it with cubes. But it is basically just really important to be aware that the form like doesn't just end as a graphic shape. It like extends backwards into space. This sort of mistake when like not being able to place forms on top of forms, also really common if you just are really used to drawing in a certain style and drawing like certain features looking a certain way. For example, the head. This sort of angle, like the upwards angle, someone who is not used to drawing forms, if they draw this sort of guideline for themselves, they might not know how to deal with placing the features on top of this. So instead of following the guidelines, you just draw what you know and you just place the eyes like where you're used to placing the eyes, nose, and the mouth. This is not following the form at all. So I would also just practice like how to place things actually according to the guidelines. This is not a great example. I did not do a great job, but at least this is more in form than this, which is not following the form at all. Another thing to note is that I consider like this collarbone bracket and like where the shoulders are to be completely different from the torso area because they can move independently. I don't know if any of you have ever learned dance, but one of the like principles of dance is isolation, and you can totally isolate this collarbone like upper body shoulder bracket from your torso. But let's just do some examples. I'm just gonna do some random ideas here. Not really knowing how they're gonna turn out. So you can see I've like had the head tilted upwards and to the right. The torso is tilted to the right as well and kind of upwards, and the pelvis is to the right and kind of downwards. It's good to note that this is the general rhythm of the body as well. But after I've drawn this, you can totally position the shoulders any which way. So since the head is tilting this way, I'm going to tilt the shoulders the other way to see if we can get some fun contrapposto. Is that what it's called? Contrapposta? I don't know. Some art term. But you see how this angle is completely different from the like horizontal angle of the chest? This can also add some variety. This is a great exercise if you don't know how to draw from imagination, right? Because there's just so many what ifs. What if I draw the head this way? What if I draw the torso that way? What if I angle the shoulders a different way? Just one quick note about what I said here about the general like tilt of the body. From the side, the body is always kind of following the S shape of the spine, which is like this, which means that the chest is naturally going to be tilted up. The head is like naturally going to kind of be tilted more downwards along this like neck spine area. And then the pelvis is generally tilted more downwards. So that means like, even though it can be fun to experiment, you can also like draw a really fucked up pose where it's like head tilted upwards, sure. But then torso tilted completely downwards. And then pelvis tilted upwards. I guess this could work. This could kind of be like a downwards angle of a seated person. That's kind of what I'm seeing here. So this is where like the practice where you kind of are able to place forms on top of forms comes in, where it's like, okay, I can confidently like place forms on top of this without it like breaking. So I guess it can work. Picturing this might be easier if you used boxes. So for example, drawing the downwards tilted torso, it can also be pictured like this as a box. And that might help you place like the forms easier on top of the body, because the front of the box is usually always like where the collarbones are. The neck is always over here. Etc. So let's just do a few demos of this principle. You can kind of draw along with me. I'm sure you get the point by now. There kind of isn't like a right or wrong way to do this. It's more of just like an exercise to loosen up the way that you think about posing. And so that you can feel more comfortable thinking about like all the what ifs. What if I tilted this that way? What if I tilted this the other way? What if I started overlapping the forms? And you can kind of see me using this like shorthand to draw like indications of which way the torso is facing by using like the side of the pecs. I think if you're able to distinguish like the side of the body from the front of the body, you're already like 75% of the way there. It's like kind of a common problem for people to not be able to, or just like not understanding that there is a side of the body, which is once again why it's kind of like beneficial to kind of see these forms in boxes as well. Because with boxes, it's a little bit easier to kind of like say like, yeah, obviously like this is this side of the body. I'm going to try to draw the torso first this time, see what happens. And then I'm going to overlap the pelvis here. Interesting. Oh my God. I feel like this is like one of those gotcha like splash arts where like she's like looking down at me. How about we draw one from the back? I think that'd be interesting. From the back, I'm gonna start with the torso. So we're drawing the spine now. And the more you do of these, the more you kind of learn like what are like realistic angles for the body parts to be at. For example, from the back at this angle, since it's kind of like a top-down angle, we're looking at the body from like, we're seeing the top parts of the body, right? This is what the rotation is telling us. If I had drawn the head looking upwards, this could happen, but it also looks really awkward. Because it's just not following the overall like perspective rules of this pose, which is like top down this way. This it could happen potentially, but it's also just like awkward and weird. I'm gonna do a side profile this time, might be interesting. But I'm going to face everything else a different way. What is this character doing? Looks like a jump of some sort. So yeah, I think this pose would have been better if the head was like not in complete profile. So what if we use the same template like this, but I turn the head downwards. And do something like this. That's more interesting to me. And if you're feeling a little bit overwhelmed at like the amount of things that I mentioned in this video, and you're like, oh, what do I start though? Do I start by learning the boxes? Do I start by practicing like drawing the forms and the circles and drawing through the forms? Do I like practice drawing the features on top of the forms and getting that right? Do I just learn all the muscles and the anatomy? What do I learn first? Is there a correct order to learn everything? Someone asked this on stream recently, and my answer was like, there is no correct order to learn these things. You have to think about the fundamentals of art like you're weaving a tapestry, okay? Like this thread is anatomy. This thread is form. This thread is drawing things on top of form. This thread is gesture, and so on and so on. There's like so many threads that you could have. In order to like learn art, you have to weave them. You can't just like take one or two. You're just gonna make like a little string. You're not gonna end up like be able to make a full tapestry of like understanding by only focusing on one or two things. So take one of the threads, really consider it. What color is it? What is it made out of? Like practice it, and then pull it over here, and then learn something else, like how to draw boxes. And you learn how to draw boxes and you pull it over there. And then you learn a little bit of gesture and then you pull it in as well. And then you go back to form. You learn a little bit more about form and you just start weaving back and forth. And eventually you will have a more comprehensive knowledge of art than if you have just like focused or become overwhelmed on one thing. There is no correct order, just have fun. The purpose of me teaching you this is that so you can start to have more freedom when drawing and have fun experimenting with different ways to place the body parts. So hopefully you do that. I'm thinking about starting an individual mentorship. I will leave like an email thing in the description, and if you want to sign up to get notified for when that happens, I'll also post about it on social media. Possibly also some way to submit practice that you do based on this video. And so I can review it maybe on stream sometime. So if I had to give you assignments for what we talked about in this video, I would say if you are a true beginner, I would start with like firstly, practice drawing guidelines and drawing through the form of the guidelines. Practice forms, guidelines. Let's just say like 10 spherical ones, like ovular ones for like the head, torso, and pelvis. 10 like spherical ones. And then try like 10 boxes, draw through the form, okay? And then if you have that down, come up with 20 different poses. 20 pose sketches where you're just like thinking about what if I tilt the head this way? What if I tilt the head that way? What if the chest is tilted this way and that way? These are experimental. And then 3, this is perhaps more advanced or something, but practice drawing forms on top of forms. So like features on top of those forms that you just drew. Can you draw eyes looking down? Do you know how to overlap the eyebrow, eyes, nose, mouth at different angles? Draw features / muscle / clothing on top of those forms. Try not to break the guidelines that you drew. So if you want to practice, this is what I would practice for the subjects mentioned in this video. Okay, I hope that helped. Hope y'all learned something new. And I'll see you in the next video.